Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next in our BCT Conservation webinar series. I'm Joel Stibbard, Senior Ecologist here at the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, or the BCT. The BCT work with landholders to establish and manage conservation areas on private land, and my role in the education team is to provide advice to our landholders and the general public on managing for conservation, and to help create a conservation community within which we can all learn new ways to help the wildlife that we cherish. Today is such an opportunity, so thanks for being here. Next to me as well, I have Sue Pritchard from the BCT Agreements team. Hi, Sue.
Hey.
Welcome. I've got a friend today. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're all meeting today, recognising their ongoing connection to land, waters and culture. I'm on Darug country in Parramatta, and I know we have people calling in from right across New South Wales and possibly even further afield. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people with us today. And today we're talking about the management of farm dams for biodiversity, which represents an exciting opportunity for landholders to enhance their dams to support local wildlife while providing resilience and increased productivity to properties. Farm dams represent infrastructure that may or may not be still serving its original purpose, yet they can provide a crucial resource for native species, particularly in drought, fire and heat waves, which, let's be honest, we're all bracing ourselves for as El Nino approaches. So then, if you are lucky enough to have one, the time is now to take a look at your farm dam and work towards improving water quality, ecosystem function, and turn that hole in the ground into a haven for native species. So to do this, we are very grateful to have Australian National University and Sustainable Farms ecologist Dave Smith, who will be calling on the years of farm dam research they have undertaken to talk us through the steps involved in enhancing the property dam, whether it be as part of existing agricultural practices or simply as habitat and a water source for native species. And of course, Sue is here, and she's going to talk to us about the opportunities for BCT landholders to manage farm dams in their agreement areas. How are we both today?
Good.
Good?
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, thanks, Dave. Excellent. So once we hear from both Dave and Sue, we'll have some time for questions, some of which you guys have already asked when you registered. I've got them here. Thank you so much. And our live audience also has a chance to pose questions via Slido, which I can answer on this nifty little iPad here. Rest assured, anything that we can't get to within the hour, we can provide comment on in a follow-up email as we normally do. So, Dave, I'm going to go to you first, mate, and ask you to give us a little bit of background on what the ANU and Sustainable Farms do, and particularly some info on the Farm Dams project. Thanks, mate.
No worries. G'day everyone. Good to be here today. So I work for the Australian National University on a project called Sustainable Farms, and the group's been around for a long time, so we've been researching sort of biodiversity on farms for a bit over 20 years now. And in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, we've sort of gone towards the Sustainable Farms project, a bit of a rebranding and a redirection. And really the reason we wanted to do this was because we wanted to sort of make our research a little bit more multidisciplinary, and we also wanted to have more focus on outreach and putting that research into the hands of landholders like yourselves. Can you take me to the next slide, please? So this is the area that we work in. So we have several quite large-scale landscape experiments, many of which have been going for quite a long time now. So the Western Murray, for example, and the Southwest Slopes, and the Nanangrow experiment you can see there have been going for a really long time, sort of 10 to 20 years. And some of the other experiments have been a little bit more recent. And so the blue area that you can see there is our farm dam experiment. And so this is more recent work. This is work that's happened over the past couple of years, about 4 years. Sorry, I can see someone thinks my headphones might not be working. Anyway, so this farm dam experiment
We can hear you, Dave.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, sorry.
You're all right, mate.
Yeah, so for this work, we've got about 130 odd sites across this study area, sort of anywhere from northeast Victoria to kind of Orange in New South Wales. And obviously that's the focus of today's webinar. So I'll hand it back to you, Joel.
Great. Thanks, mate. Yeah, and look, before we get into the nitty-gritty of dam management, I wanted to show everybody a video that actually Sustainable Farms and ANU produced a couple of years ago. So I think we'll go straight to that, and then we'll come back and talk some more on it.
The property is 2,200 acres, just at the foot of Telltale Mountain, and we breed Angus cattle. We've been here 44 years now. Back in the autumn, we went to a field day to look at fencing off farm dams, but still retaining a hardened access to the dam. That was a finished project that had been probably established 10 years. It was working really well, and it looked very aesthetically pleasing. It motivated me to do something. Water quality is something that's important to all life, whether it be livestock or for plant life, such as your pastures, but also for wildlife. And I guess the dry times that we seem to be facing quite a lot now is even more stark. 0.5 milligram of manure can decrease their water consumption, keep the water cleaner, or grow more cattle. In one dam, we've retained a hardened access with gravel into the dam. The other 3, we've excluded the stock entirely. Those 3 have a trough outside of the excluded area, and we can put bloat oil in the trough, which helps to prevent bloat for the cattle. So the hardened access point reduces tugging of the cattle on the dam edge, which helps keep the water cleaner. Having an access point, there's no moving parts, so nothing can go wrong. Having a trough does introduce a little bit of risk.
During times like this where there's not a lot of water in the landscape, often farm dams are places where aquatic animals and plants can find a home until conditions improve for them to return to other areas like wetlands and creeks.
Enhancing biodiversity in farm dams is not just great for biodiversity in its own right, but it has a huge effect on how the landscape functions. The dragonflies and damselflies that breed in the dam will go out and forage out in the pastures eating aphids and other pest insects. The frogs that breed in the dam, the thousands of tadpoles that hatch out that eat all the nutrients that accumulate there, will get eaten by other species, and that'll spread that nutrient back across the landscape. So it's really important in nutrient cycling. A lot of native plants start to come in, particularly the water plants, such as your juncus and bulrushes, and the water cooch, which you probably already see on this dam starting to come up. Now, as soon as you have that, the insects start to have a substrate to lay eggs and breed in these places. Frogs have a place to hide and lay their eggs, and the birds come in to feed on these things. So they really do become these biodiversity hotspots in these agricultural landscapes. Yeah, I see an opportunity with the farm dam to obviously provide a valuable water source for the animals, an environment for wildlife, and also increase the aesthetic appeal of the dam.
There are a lot of benefits that farmers get from doing works on their farm dam. I think the thing that motivates a lot of farmers is the productivity benefits they get from farm dam enhancements. But we've also heard from a lot of people that the aesthetic benefits they get from an enhanced farm dam really improves their farm overall and provides, I guess, a green space for them to come to, particularly during droughts.
It made me feel good to be doing something positive. Digging out this 2 metres of silt in the bottom of the dam, that we could try and prevent that in the future and keep the dam deeper, cooler and have water for longer. There's a lot of hard slog during a drought feeding animals, so it felt good to be doing something positive. So we hope in time that we improve the aesthetics of the dam area. We'll have a nice, shaded water source with some nice plants and some more increased bird life.
There we have it. So that video is, of course, a few years old now, as I said. But that dry landscape is quite a stark reminder, isn't it, of the harsh conditions that landholders, face year on year and will face more frequently as part of climate change. So, of course, the messaging still holds true. And in fact, as Dave mentioned, ANU and Sustainable Farms have recently completed their 4-year farm dam study that further supports that relationship between good dam management and benefits for biodiversity and farm productivity. So we're going to drag Dave back again, kicking and screaming, to touch on this a little bit and provide some how-to, importantly for our attendees today, some how-to for dam enhancement as part of the second half of your presentation, mate. So take it away. Thanks, bud.
No worries. Okay, so firstly, sorry about the technical issues before. Hopefully we're back on track now. So farm dams are these really ubiquitous features of agricultural landscapes across the world, and certainly here in Australia as well. So recent work by some collaborators at Deakin University have estimated there's about 1.765 million farm dams across Australia. And with these real concentrations, as you'd expect in the southeastern and southwestern wheat sheep belts. And so a lot of our natural wetlands in these agricultural landscapes, we've either lost or they're heavily degraded. But what we do have, of course, are these farm dams, these artificial wetlands that are dotted across these areas. And I think there's some real potential in these farm dams, both to contribute to agriculture. Obviously, they have an important role there, but also to contribute to biodiversity conservation on private land in particular. Next slide, please. So here's an example of what I want to talk about today. So these are two farm dams. These photos were taken on the same day, on the same farm, on a property just north of Albury, where I'm based. And this is back in 2019 again, so pretty dry conditions, obviously. But the dam on the right is just a typical farm dam that you'd see in paddocks all across our region and our state. But the dam on the left has been fenced out about 20 years ago, this particular dam, and replanting within that fenced area as well. You can see on this dam there is a hardened access point. So stock in that paddock do have permanent access to water, but the rest of the dam is protected from livestock. And I wanted to show you this example because I think it's a good demonstration of just how different these two dams can be and the sort of changes that you can expect to see when you fence and revegetate around farm dams. Next slide, please. So as Joel mentioned, we've set up this quite large experiment. So over the past 4 years, we've been monitoring about 130 farm dams. Some of those dams are Marcus Richardson's dams that you saw in the video, as well as Vince Ryan's dams. And one of the things that we've been looking at is vegetation. And I'll go through a whole host of things that we've been looking at. I should mention that the way that we set up this experiment was to have our control dams, which are, unfenced dams, just like we saw on the last slide. And our treatment dams are enhanced dams. So by enhanced, I mean that they've been fenced and revegetated. So what we found with vegetation is that we saw really strong responses at our enhanced dams. So much more riparian vegetation, much more vegetation in the water body itself, so aquatic water plants in the water body, but also gains in vegetation outside of the dam, but inside the fenced area. And I'm particularly talking about the ground layer here. So by allowing that ground layer to build up, which we achieve by excluding livestock, we're introducing this natural filtration system, particularly in the inlet of the dam, and that's does a really good job of filtering water as it passes through and intercepting some of the nutrients and the runoff that would otherwise make its way into the dam. Next slide, please. So by intercepting these nutrients and by excluding livestock directly from dams, so we no longer have stock defecating and urinating directly into the dam itself, what we found is we have really significant gains in water quality. So At an enhanced dam, we expect to see much lower turbidity, less E. coli within the water, lower fecal coliform counts, lower levels of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. And we also found that enhanced dams perform really well in droughts compared to control dams. And if you cast your mind back to a few slides ago, that might seem pretty intuitive. So the finding was that water quality in wet years, water quality is still drastically different or significantly different, significantly better in our enhanced dams than our control dams. But when we move into those drought periods, the quality in enhanced dams drops a little bit, but water quality really plummets in those control dams. So another important finding. Next slide, please. We also collaborated with Deakin University researchers to look at greenhouse gas emissions from farm dams. And we found that by reducing nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and increasing the oxygen in water, largely by having aquatic plants within the water, we're able to reduce methane fluxes by about 56%. And methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas. So that's quite a significant outcome. Next slide, please. We've also been doing a range of biodiversity work. Freshwater macroinvertebrates is one of the first things we looked at. So water bugs I'm talking about here, and we found that in our enhanced dams, we had much greater species richness. So more species of water bugs occurring in our enhanced dams than our control dams. And the species that we were finding that were in enhanced dams and not in control dams were species that were less tolerant of poor water quality. So again, a reflection of the change in water quality. We also found that we had higher abundances, so more water bugs, more sort of individual water bugs in our enhanced dams relative to our control dams as well. We've done a lot of work on bird diversity at farm dams as well. So going out and doing bird surveys and also doing a little bit of breeding work. And we're finding that we have more bird species, both bush birds and water bird species at our enhanced dams than we do in our control dams. And largely that's because of the planting. It sort of opens up this opportunity for all kinds of birds to move into those sites. And then for the bird breeding work, we found a lot more bird breeding activity, both water birds and bush birds, at our enhanced dams relative to our control dams. And so for the bird breeding work, we actually also compared our enhanced dams to shelter belts, so other sort of restoration plantings that didn't have a permanent water body. And we actually found that bird breeding activity was higher, significantly higher at our enhanced dams than it was at our shelter belts. So interesting result there. And it was true also for just bush birds. So it's not just water birds that are responding to that. Next slide, please. So this is what we're talking about with this intervention. This is an example of what you might think about doing. So obviously priority number one is to exclude livestock, and the way that people will be doing that is with a fence. So it's important to do the fence well, and make sure that you leave plenty of room around the outside, and particularly make sure you've got enough room in the inlet to allow a good sort of filtration system to build up. Also important to include plenty of room around the spillway as well. So try and get some grass building up in the spillway, and that's going to help with erosion as well, which is a pretty common problem for farm dams, erosion in spillways. Once we've got our fence, it's important to obviously still have access to the water for livestock, and the best way to do that is with pumps and troughs. Lots of landholders are finding that's really, really effective, and they're very reliable these days as well. But another option, if you don't want to go down the route of the pump and trough system, is an access point. So This is a little chute for stock to get down into the water, and particularly if you've got cattle, then you probably want some kind of a geofabric or crushed rock or something like that to stop the pugging and erosion there. And once we've done that, we'll think about putting some plants in there. So we want to plant locally native species. You want to avoid overplanting trees and shrubs around the inlet and the overflow, because we don't want to shade out that ground layer. That's why we want to have lots of grasses and sedges and that sort of stuff growing. And also have a think about wind and sun. So if you can use these trees and shrubs to cut out the wind, so think about your prevailing wind, then you're likely to have less evaporation on these dams. And think about the sun too. So the more shade that you're able to cast over a dam, the cooler the water is going to be, which is great for stock. And you're also likely to see less evaporation there too. And some of the extra things that you might think about doing for biodiversity is introducing some snags, really great for water bugs and frogs and fish and all sorts of aquatic things, but also for birds to perch on. And you might also think about installing an island if people are really keen. It might be an earthen island or maybe just a floating platform, which if you check out our website, next slide please, you'll see a video on how you might do that. I've covered a fair bit today in a short amount of time, so I want to point you in the direction of our website as well. And there's a few resources on there that hopefully people will find useful. One of them is sort of broad overview of enhancing farm dams and the things to consider. The other one that you can see there is a planting guide. So hopefully that'll guide you with the actual planting and think about what sort of species to plant and where. And there's also a technical guide on there that sort of gets down to the nitty-gritty of farm dams. So thanks very much. Back to you, Joel.
That's great, mate. Thank you. And you mentioned the video, the floating island video. People don't need to go to the website. They can just stick around and see it at the end. So.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. Thanks, mate. That's great. We'll also talk about the new webinar that's coming up on the 30th. There's a link on the screen you'll be able to find to be able to access that, which will be great. Dive a bit more into that detail. And now it's up to Sue. I think I've said enough on the couch for the moment, and I'll give it over to Sue to talk about the BCT's recent guidance that we've developed for landholders on farm dam management and what opportunities are available for our landholders to do some of this work. So thanks, Sue. I'll give you this clicker and
Thank you.
Off you go.
Thanks, Joel. And thanks, Dave. It's really nice, welcome, good news in that research.
Yep.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking today about managing farm dams in private conservation areas, so in BCT conservation areas. We've recently produced this fact sheet. It's just recognising the common occurrence of farm dams as legacy infrastructure in conservation areas. So BCT has three broad programs that agreements fall under: the Conservation Management Program and our Biodiversity Offset Program. Landholders in those programs receive annual regular payments, whilst under the Conservation Partners Program, landholders can apply for grants for specific projects. So when establishing an agreement, the landholder will work with our staff to develop a management plan, and this is made up of distinct management actions. So I'm going to talk about some of those following this slide. So when developing that management plan, if there's farm dams in or even near a conservation area, things that will be considered are the biodiversity benefits that we can get from that dam, looking at how we can ensure the effective use of water from the dam for things like watering new plantings, for firefighting, and ensuring there's still water supply for any stock as well. In some areas, particularly in the west of the state, we'll also look at the role of farm dams in managing overabundant native herbivores and pest animals. Oh, wrong way. Go back. Go forward, in fact.
There we go. Back to the couch.
Yeah. So Yeah, so Dave spoke a lot about stock exclusion and revegetation being the sort of key steps for enhancing dams. So with BCT agreements, in fact, there's either no grazing or limited grazing, and so this really gives the native vegetation a great opportunity to regenerate and establish. Under our agreements, the funded management actions can include fencing to exclude the stock, and also installation of pumps and troughs, as Dave spoke about. That can be a really effective management action as well. So in terms of looking at whether planting is required or not, we do have some really good guidelines, and of course our regional staff can advise on this as well, around looking at your area, how resilient is it? Is excluding stock going to be enough to allow the vegetation to come back, or is some sort of planting required? Forward this time. Yeah. Just like really tempted to hit the red button for some reason. So this slide talking about, as I mentioned, in some areas, particularly in the west of the state where water might not be readily available in the landscape, human-made water sources like dams can play a role in managing overabundant native herbivores like kangaroos, and also pest animals like pigs and goats. So in these instances, the management actions might include fencing to exclude target species so they can't get access to the dam for water, or monitoring exclosures. So that's the picture here on the left. And this just allows us to monitor the total grazing pressure. So that's the grazing pressure from native herbivores and non-native herbivores. Also, management actions might include trap yards, specifically the picture shown here on the right. This is where there's goats, and these trap yards are established around a dam. So the dam is the water source that brings the goats into that trap yard. And in some instances where it's appropriate, the dam walls can actually be modified so that it will hold water some part of the year, but there won't be that permanent water source all year round. So in relation to this, again, our staff are always available to provide advice, especially at that developing the management plan stage. We do have some really good guidelines around this sort of thing. We've got essential conservation fencing guidelines and also managing overabundant kangaroo guidelines. And we've also got some very exciting brand new online education modules that Joel's going to be talking about a bit later. So yeah, lots of support and guidance around these issues for landholders. So another great benefit of dams, I guess, is that they can just be a great place to relax and enjoy nature. And so I've just got a few photos here of some of the wildlife you might be lucky enough to see at your dam. Another benefit, I guess, of spending time near the water is it can lead to an increased understanding of your conservation area, and then that can lead to hopefully better conservation outcomes as well. So while you're enjoying the serenity of your dam, things that you might notice include vegetation and water quality changes. You might notice damselflies and dragonflies flying around. The appearance of frog eggs and tadpoles, and at dusk you might even be lucky enough to see microbats. Of course, these days there is lots of technology available to help you detect and identify the wildlife. So some of these really relevant for dams are the Waterbug app. So this can help you identify what macroinvertebrates are there. You can also get relatively inexpensive bat call detectors now. They're quite small and they plug into your mobile phone. So they pick up bat calls and help you to ID them, even if you can't maybe even see the bats. So they're really super fun, or I think so anyway. Motion cameras, dams can be a great place to put motion cameras. If you get in contact with BCT, your BCT contacts, some of them may be able to lend cameras out to agreement holders. And of course, the Frog ID app. If you haven't come across this before, it's a totally awesome app. You can record frog calls, you submit it, and some amazing person at the Australian Museum will identify it for you, and they will get back to you. Sometimes there's a bit of a wait, but they'll get back to you and tell you what species it is. And BCT is actually working with the Australian Museum to promote the use of this app for landholders, and I think we're running some workshops later in the year with the Australian Museum as well. That's all from me, Joel.
No worries, Sue. Thank you. I can take that clicker.
Thank you.
You want to push the red button. I'll remember not to put you in charge of national security. Excellent. So, look, I think it's time to start on some questions. We had a few questions, well, a whole stack of questions come in as part of the registration process, which I thank everybody for. And we've also had a whole lot come in today. So that's just fantastic. I've even broken them into little categories beforehand so we can sort of try to be efficient about this. There's a few questions here around the financial support, and I think that follows on well from what Sue was talking about in regards to what the BCT can provide. So if I just go to this slide here that shows our grants. So as Sue mentioned, there are agreement types that have funding associated with them that come with annual payments. Talking about our funded conservation, pardon me, and our stewardship agreements. And those annual management payments are sort of, are there to do a lot of this work. But if you've got an unfunded agreement, there are opportunities through our grants program to, and I might not be able to read that on the slide, but there's a whole raft, excuse the pun, of actions that we can help to fund, which could be applied to your dam. And I'm talking regeneration, planting, fencing, pest control, weed control, and habitat restoration. These are, a few of the management actions that we will fund as part of being a BCT agreement holder. The other one, pardon me, sorry. The other means of support may be through your local land services. And they run, just had a quick Google search earlier actually and found the Murray LLS only just recently finished a financial, a grants scheme for local landholders to do farm dam enhancement. So I recommend for BCT agreement holders who aren't getting annual management payments, who are looking to get some money for doing dam enhancement stuff, please get in touch with us at the BCT, your local rep. You can always email me and my details come out to everybody via email. But yeah, also please, if you're a non-agreement holder, LLS would be your best spot, I think. The next question, well, next raft of questions I reckon might be, I might go to you, David. A lot of them are about questions about species to use. So there's obviously, we've got a couple of questions here. Mark, for example, asking about suitable species around the dam and if there's any good places to source them. So I guess the question would be maybe some general ideas on species, Dave, and for your planting work, where did you go to source them?
So we didn't actually do the plantings ourselves. So our sites were sites where farmers had already done these interventions or were sort of undergoing them when we began. And so they sort of sourced their plants through Landcare and native nurseries locally, like you would for any kind of restoration planting. Mm-hmm. In terms of what sort of species you would want to plant, obviously it's very difficult to give sort of specific advice around this given the range of locations that people will be watching from. Yeah. But I would say have a look at our planting guide that I flashed up on the last slide of my presentation, which you can find at our website. So in there, it'll give you good sort of general information about where to plant, where not to plant within that fenced area, and the sorts of species, if you do happen to be based in our project area, that you might include. General advice, I'd say make sure you have lots of shrubs, more shrubs than you probably think you need and less trees than you think you need. Shrubs do a lot of the heavy lifting for biodiversity, so particularly for small birds. Really, really important. And across a lot of these sort of agricultural landscapes, that shrub layer is, completely absent from large parts of the landscape. The other thing I would say is you probably don't need to have a really strong focus on aquatic and semi-aquatic species. So these species tend to re-establish themselves really well. They have long-lived seeds, a lot of them. They're also quite, I guess, they disperse really well too, so they are able to sort of recolonize sites quite quickly relative to other things. So yeah, my advice would be focus on the trees and shrubs, see what happens naturally with the water plants, and then maybe take some steps to intervene if you're not seeing the responses you'd like to see in those water plants.
Great. Thanks, David. And leading on from that, there's a couple of questions today about aquatic weeds, but then also another one, and if you don't have the answer, that's all good. We'll get back to everybody, like I said. But around issues with perhaps aquatic plants or weeds clogging up pumps that are used in dams. Did you find that can complicate things, or?
Yeah, it's not something that we saw commonly. There are, for the vast majority of our sites, and there are a fair few of these sites, it wasn't a problem. So we did see an increase in aquatic plants within the water body itself, but yeah, very few instances where there are any complications as a result of that. Yep. Azolla is another one that I know causes some problems, and Azolla is one of those plants that really responds to spikes in nutrients. And so I talked about, those nutrient levels being quite high in our control dams. So it's possible, and we don't necessarily, we sort of haven't asked this of our data yet, but it's possible that actually it's a really good way of preventing these sorts of weed problems is by actually, managing the dam in the first place and stopping them from establishing. But yeah, sometimes, with Azolla, mechanical removal is necessary, but yeah, they do respond to nutrients.
Yeah, great. Thanks, mate. And I actually saw there was that question about Azolla came in earlier from Simon. Thank you, Simon. And I did a little, again, Dr. Google, to find a really good resource on controlling Azolla in farm dams. If we can just pop that up on the screen, gentlemen. Yeah, so, have a look online if you can, and a quick Google search will find you something like this, and that actually goes through step by step of what these guys did to control Azolla, and found that there was around the inlet, was controlling those nutrients around the inlet, I think was part of their conclusion. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dave. Where to next? Oh, the BCT agreement process. Now, so a couple of people just came in with general questions about, how do I sign up for a BCT agreement? And Sue and I know quite well that, we can navigate the BCT website, which can be difficult. But if you have a look on the website, you can find an EOI form if you see the Get Involved tab, and just apply for an agreement. So if you're out there and you're interested, you've got some native veg that you'd like to see protected, please get in touch with us. And there's a very handy online form for you to use to do that. So thanks for posting those questions. That's how you can get involved. And there was one today from, if I can see here, asking about wildlife. Our property is a wildlife refuge. Do we come under the BCT? And the answer is yes, you do. And you are eligible for grant funding as well. And I failed to mention that through the grant funding, if you've got an in perpetuity agreement, you can access up to $15,000 a year for 3 years with that one application. Termed agreements are $8,000 and the wildlife refuges are $2,000. So they kind of reflect that sort of level of protection that is on the land. So, yep, there's opportunities there, and you are one of our landholders, Alison. So please contact us and we can help you out. All right, so after that, we've got some aquaculture questions. Now, these are tricky ones around opportunities for aquaculture. Sue, did you want to talk just quickly on opportunities or perhaps lack thereof for aquaculture in BCT agreements?
Yeah, so that wouldn't be permitted under BCT agreements. The BCT agreements are really focused around conservation actions rather than a commercial action, such as aquaculture. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And general questions around sort of stocking it with fish or mussels, crays. I see John's asked about that. And I saw some other questions around sort of crayfish and all those sorts of things. So any input there, David? Anything that you've seen or you've seen landholders do as part of your study?
It's not something that we've looked specifically at, so there's not a whole lot I can share around it. Stocking with fish is something that is common on farms. Lots of people want to do that for angling or for whatever reason. I guess one thing to consider, I suppose, the difference is that these are closed systems, or relatively kind of closed systems. So the sort of ecological outcome of that is a bit unknown at this point. So if that's something that you're worried about, then I'd consider not doing it. But yeah, there's no real strong outcomes from us. But I would note that there are some good examples, particularly in northeast Victoria, of farm dams being used as these sort of sites for refuge populations of small-bodied fish. So southern pygmy perch, for example, have been successfully reintroduced into well-managed farm dams around the place. And small-bodied fish are, some of the most threatened organisms on the planet. So I think, really, really interesting place to do some more research is around fish in farm dams, both species that are interesting for anglers as well as, our small-bodied species as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. And I think a lot of the advice that the BCT provide is, rightfully so, based on good science and on findings from work that organisations like David's do. So, going forward, obviously from an aquacultural perspective, it's probably a no-go for BCT agreements. I don't want to sort of talk out of turn here, but I think, if we can see those benefits, those conservation benefits from those sorts of projects, then, it's something that you could perhaps we bring to the BCT in the future, and it's something we could look at for agreement areas. But for now, it's sort of a wait and see when it comes to sort of stocking on agreement areas, that is.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask Dave, I sort of understand that yabbies, for example, can colonise dams on their own. Is that your experience? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yabbies are really mobile. You see them walking around in the paddock sometimes. It's really weird. But yeah, very good colonisers. We would have had yabbies in just about all of our dams to varying levels of abundance. But yeah, another one, native yabbies and a lot of people love eating yabbies as well. So a lot of people are happy to have plenty of yabbies in the dam.
Yeah, good fun. A few questions around water clarity, which I thought were really interesting. I'm interested in sort of plant animal life that will clear up the water if there are any, how to clear a muddy dam. And I've got a muddy dam that never settled and I haven't had stock for a year. So any input there, Dave? What do you think?
We hear this a bit. Again, it's hard to give advice without seeing the dam itself, but if I was to take a guess, it's probably to do with the soil type. So it's probably really fine clay particles that are just too small to settle, essentially. So you can do all these interventions, keep nutrients out of the dam, all that stuff, and still have turbid water. I guess one of the things to remember is that just because the water looks turbid or looks dirty, you might not see that sort of drop in turbidity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to see the drops in all the other things that I spoke about in that water quality slide. So you still are likely to have less nutrients in there, less fecal coliforms, less E. coli, all that stuff. And another thing is that once you do get those aquatic plants establishing, they're likely to sort of filter out and capture some of those free-floating particles as well. But the challenge there, it's a bit of a catch-22 because aquatic plants won't necessarily grow as well in turbid water because they don't get that light penetration. I guess be patient and hopefully find some comfort in the fact that it might just be turbidity that you're not seeing the response from, but you are seeing all these other responses as well.
Thanks, David. I feel like I'm peppering you with all the questions, mate, but
that's all right.
It's great. It's fantastic. It's just so good to have you here. And I mean, and you talk about patience, and we had a question asking about, does it take 20 years to see results? So, obviously you got the 4-year farm dam study, but you've done work in the region for, several decades now. So, what kind of timeframes did you tend to start to see real results as part of that farm dam study?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So in terms of water quality, the results changed very, very quickly. So in a matter of months, you're likely to see improvements in water quality. So that's one of the really exciting things to me about this, is that you don't have to sit around and wait for 2 decades like you do with some sort of natural interventions on farms. So yeah, you can expect to see those benefits really quite quickly. And biodiversity wise, again, water bugs respond really quickly. Frogs are good colonizers as well. They're probably going to respond quite quickly. Water birds will respond pretty quickly. It's the bush birds that'll take a little bit longer to respond. So anything that's relying on the trees and shrubs within that area will be, a little bit slower, but there are plenty of species that occupy plantings, and our research has demonstrated this really, really quickly. And then you sort of accumulate species as those plantings get more and more mature, and that sort of changes composition a little bit as well.
Great. Thanks, mate. We had a couple of questions about on-farm workshops, and when are we going to, the BCT or otherwise going to be running anything sort of on farms for promoting dam enhancement and looking at some of these how-tos. And I just wanted to mention quickly, if we can bring this slide up, gentlemen, that we've got a couple of projects that the BCT run that involve a lot of field events. Particularly the first one, the PLC Matters program, which is a partnership between the BCT and Landcare, New South Wales, where we'll be running dozens of workshops across each region over the next 2 years as part of that partnership. It's quite a substantial partnership financially, and also it involves a lot of people here in the BCT and Landcare New South Wales and regional Landcare coordinators to run events. Me personally would love to be involved in some of those as well. So there are definitely opportunities for us to run these sorts of workshops as part of that program. And it's always great for us here in the BCT to hear from landholders about, what sorts of workshops they want to see. So I definitely encourage landholders to just touch base with their regional contacts or myself, just with an email to say, look, it'd be great to have something on ground. And if you're a landholder that's got a farm dam and you'd love to, show it off and have people turn up, that is fantastic. And that's a lot of the work actually done for us, because that's where a lot of the work is sort of, working to find a place to have these events. So we'd love to have that. We'd love to have, the opportunity to do so. So please touch base with us. The other one is our Frog ID partnership. So we, and Sue mentioned, Frog ID is the app, the citizen science app, where you can record frog calls, and Dr. Jodie Rawley and her team will work to identify those species for you. We have a partnership with them as well to run events and sort of, produce materials that support each other. 2 of those events are actually scheduled this upcoming September and November to coincide with Frog Week, Frog ID Week, which I think is early November. So we're going to host one out in Western Sydney, and then there'll be another one in either the Upper Hunter or Central West, again, depending on site availability. So there are opportunities through the BCT to actually get involved in some of these programs. These on-farm workshops for farm dams. And, without trying to sort of pass the buck too much here, I also do encourage landholders to then also contact local land services and others, rattle the cage and ask them to host workshops like this, in regions where perhaps we can't. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that as well. Thank you very much for those questions, as always. Another question here that I had just about let me get myself together here. If you can't fence a dam, this comes from Andrea. If you can't fence a dam, what is the one thing you can do to make a difference on farm dams? Which I think was a great question.
Really good question, that one. So one of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk about today was that with our water quality work and possibly our bird work as well, we actually split our controlled sites into grazing types. So we worked out whether or not they were sort of set stocked in those paddocks or whether they had some kind of rotational grazing in there. And what we're finding is that those paddocks that do have that rotational grazing tend to have better water quality than those paddocks without. And that's likely a ground cover thing and sort of filtering, again, that filtration effect intercepting those nutrients. So we see this, and this is sort of fairly preliminary research, but we see this kind of staggered effect where we have really good water quality in enhanced dams, so fully fenced dams, pretty good water quality in rotationally grazed control dams, and the poorest water quality at dams that have that constant access from livestock. So you will improve the outcomes from runoff, but with that rotational grazing, you still do have that sort of direct impact of stock on those dams and the pugging and direct defecation and urination as well. So yeah, I think that's one of the best things you can do is think about your grazing regime. And also, depending on how that goes, you might start to see some natural regeneration of trees and shrubs in those areas as well.
Great point. You were talking earlier, weren't you, about...
Oh, yeah, I was just going to mention, I don't know if you've come across this, Dave, that a colleague had told me that it's been observed that cattle will often, if there's a trough there, they'll go for that over the dam. So even if there's not a fence, they might still just go for the trough.
Yeah, stock do tend to like drinking from troughs, and we hear the same thing anecdotally from people all the time as well. So, yeah, I guess that's another thing to consider.
It makes sense, doesn't it? If you're a big cow, I don't want to walk down to the dam. I'll just sort of have a drink from this trough over here. It's cleaner and it's like at neck height. It's perfect.
Yeah. Another thing is, though, that stock, particularly on hot days, do like to kind of congregate around dams and mill around dams. And I think that really does exaggerate that influence that I was talking about with that direct kind of impact on a dam as well. So, yeah, I mean, you might even find that at different times of the years that effect is stronger than other times of the year.
Yeah, okay. I wonder if there's anything been with shading the trough itself. Put the trough under some trees.
yeah, possibly. But yeah, it's I think even without that shading effect, it's just that sort of probably evaporative cooling coming from these water bodies. And I mean, cattle in particular love to go into the dam, and they'll often sort of wade right out into the dam to have a drink to try and get to that cool water because, they don't want to be drinking that shallow water that's sitting there in the sun baking.
That makes sense. Great. Look, there's a few more in here, I think. Questions around restoration approach. Is it better to actively re-veg, or can some positive outcomes be achieved simply by excluding stock? I think we've spoken about that, haven't we? Like that idea of removing stock, you get some natural regeneration occurring. Removal of trees on dam wall, how will this affect its stability? How do we do it safely?
So it's something you see a bit is trees growing on dam walls. Obviously, you would never want to plant trees on dam walls, but in some cases they've sort of established there naturally. The advice that I've heard around this, so from some, extension officers at Agriculture Victoria, for example, will say that if you've got a tree that's established on that bank, you're better off not to remove it. So just leave it there. The problem is that when the tree dies, it'll sort of senesce and those roots will sort of rot away, and then you'll be left with these holes in the wall itself, and that can lead to leaks in the dam and potentially even sort of catastrophic failure of dam walls. So, certainly avoid it in the first place. If you can get in early before they have a chance to get roots, right down into the dam wall, then you'd remove those plants. But the advice I've heard is probably best not to intervene.
Okay, that's interesting. And a few questions around silt traps, inlet design. So for silt traps, did you guys use silt traps at all? Have you see a lot of that happening?
No, all of our sites just had that sort of natural system within that sort of broader fenced area. I have heard of people installing these kind of silt traps, whether that's just a sort of a deep kind of channel, I suppose, that water has to go through and sort of let that sediment settle out before it reaches the dam. And that sounds great. We haven't tested it. I'm sure it works pretty well. But then if you're not excluding that second mechanism, which we've spoken about a fair bit today, that sort of direct access by stock, then you're not getting that whole benefit.
Great. Thanks, David. Look, I think we've got 5 minutes to go. I think we'll leave it there because I wanted to quickly mention this upcoming webinar that ANU and Sustainable Farms are running. It's a free webinar on the 30th of August. This one will be diving into the detail of the science behind the restoration tips that Dave's provided today. And we'll hear from esteemed academics on the research findings from the Farm Dam study and discuss the Farm Dam restoration project that Landcare Australia is delivering across New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. So again, there'll be a link at the bottom of your screen that you can access and register for that one. And yeah, look, I didn't even get to say thanks to everyone. How rude of me. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Dave. I'll give a quick sign off at the end. But look, I want to preach about this, which has been my baby for the last 12 months, this online conservation course. We're a mere week away from release of the 9 modules that cover every facet of conservation management. It provides tailored information for the management of a BCT agreement area, but it is also great for existing and prospective BCT agreement holders. But importantly, it's a fantastic knowledge base for conservation management in general, providing sound principles and frameworks that are tried and tested in conservation land management on those range of topics that you see on screen. So you don't need to be an agreement holder to get plenty out of it. In fact, if you want to understand the best approach to weed control, to re-veg, to conservation grazing, to providing supplementary habitat like artificial hollows, pests, ecological, cultural burns, the whole shebang, it's there in this course. It can even contribute through our partnership with Tocal as a registered training organisation. It can contribute to a Certificate 3, 4 or diploma in conservation land management. And best of all, it is free. Goodness, not much comes for free these days, but this does. The BCT will be spreading the news far and wide next week. I think actually the release might even be today, so very timely. So keep a lookout for the links to register and start learning how to best help the wildlife for free and at your own convenience. So thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, David, particularly for us peppering you with all those questions, mate. And thank you at home for joining us. Please touch base with us if you have any further questions. There's a whole stack I didn't get to today. I see them, lots of comments. Fantastic. Love it. We will we'll get back to you with comments on that. I'll make sure of it. And tune in again on Wednesday, the 22nd of November, when we will discuss citizen science in all its glory. We will discuss tried and true techniques that have been around for a while, but we'll also put a spotlight on some of the more recent advancements in remote capture technology and how apps are turning our often maligned but very handy mobile devices into data capture tools that we can all use to increase our knowledge and inform where conservation of threatened species should be targeted. I will also introduce BCT's upcoming Land Libraries Citizen Science Project, which will utilise those techniques and will loan out equipment to landholders to efficiently capture biodiversity data on private land. And I'll also talk about how you can get involved. So please tune in for that one. Well, and before you walk out, I want to show you all, we've got a few video links up there, a couple more videos that the Sustainable Farms have produced on the role that farm dams can play as a wildlife refuge during and post-wildfire. That's the first one. And then the last one is what we've talked about earlier, those tips for a wildlife pontoon. So let's check those out. And please send us through any dam enhancement pics that you've got that you may have, some before and afters are always fantastic. And if you're happy to do so, we can share them on our socials with other landholders to get, to continue to build that conservation community and show the good work that everybody's done. I see there's been comments coming through, people commenting, providing advice on where to go for plantings, who to speak to, some research, some areas that you can get some funding, all of those sorts of things. This is the kind of conservation community we want to build, and through our socials and through sending us stuff, we can help share the word. So again, thank you very much. Thank you, Sue. Thanks, David. Thanks for being here. Thanks. And until November, I say farewell.
Thanks,
and watch
Joel.
the videos. Thanks. Cheers. See ya.
So the fire passed through here January 4, about 3:15 in the afternoon. All the banks around the dam burnt well. Everything was black. So my name's David Waters. You're on Billygunga, which is on Old Tumbarumba Road, Batlow. We had some rain here. We've had about 80 mils in the last week, 45 of which happened in about 2 seconds. So we thought there was going to be a lot of damage to the water quality. But because we've got such good plant growth and grasses and bulrushes and sedges around the edge of the dam, they've sort of acted as a filter.
The idea of fencing off a farm dam is to create that extra vegetation around the edge to act as a filtration. The Australian bush has, I guess, evolved with fire for many years, and a lot of the vegetation can respond quickly. We've seen all the eucalypts around here are starting to sprout from the epicormic growth. David's even noticed that the plants that he only planted a couple of months ago had enough energy in their roots to regenerate.
It's a good feeling to know that as much as, 80 or 90% of the farm was burned, but the dam itself is holding up. The water quality is still good, the platypus is still there, there's still a lot of water birds that are, they call this dam their home, which is great.
So we've just attached our cleaned drums to the underside of the raft, and we've put them in a position that will mean that it's not lopsided, hopefully once we deploy it. We've tied the drums on with baling twine, and we've also tied a shade cloth onto the top of the raft with the baling twine as well. If you can, I would recommend using wire, just because it's more permanent, it's not going to degrade, but for this dam we've chosen baling twine because it's close to the house, so we can keep an eye on it if it starts to fall apart or untie. And it's also an area where stock and sometimes vehicles need to pass through, so for safety as much as anything else we've chosen baling twine. But and as with the shade cloth as well, because they're plastic materials, don't intend to just pop them on and then walk away, because they're materials that you don't want to just maybe fall apart and sink to the bottom one day, because these rafts they're not going to be permanent. You might get a couple of years before they start to sink and you need to make a new one. That's fine. So we've just tied shade cloth to the top as a way of helping secure the plants that we're going to pop into the gaps of the pallets. It also provides a bit of grip for things like turtles or even yabbies to hold onto or climb up on, and it will sort of protect and provide some substrate for the plants. We've stuffed the rafts with a straw, like a mulch that we just had, and that's going to be a bit of substrate for roots to grow through. It'll also kickstart the building up of bug colonies and make a bit of food for yabbies and all sorts of things like that, just as a bit of building block. And we haven't wrapped the shade cloth the whole way around because we thought it's easier for plant roots to grow through, but it also allows a bit of movement of water and oxygen through the straw so that you don't get a build-up of stuff you might not want, like a bit of algae or things like that. And the pallets that we've chosen are untreated, and we've picked ones that have the stamp that say HT for heat treated. It's really important that you do that, and also make sure that untreated pallet doesn't look like it's got chemical leakage from things that might have been used for before. So that's it.